Middle of the country, but not middle of the road opinions. It's the podcast dedicated to sports in the air capital of the world.
I'm going to Wichita.
Wichita, Kansas, and beyond. With Tommy Castor and Weston Mills, this is Keeper of the Games.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to Keeper of the Games. We are the wildly underqualified, yet mildly entertaining podcast all about sports here in Wichita, Kansas. I'm Tommy Castor. My co-host is Weston Mills. Time for another episode of Keeper of the Games. And Weston, you've had yourself a pretty busy day as we're getting ready to record this podcast. Are you sure your brain can handle anything more than what you've already gone through today?
Yeah, man. I think as I'm approaching the dad life, I don't know if I know the phrase that frequently gets used is, pregnant brain or mommy brain. I think dad brain's a thing too that I'm slowly building up upon me. I'm having those moments, but no, I think I'm ready to rock and roll after a day full of all sorts of baby things.
Yeah, you guys are getting pretty close to the deadline. I know we haven't talked about it much on the podcast, but yeah, it's getting close to go time for you and your wife.
Yeah, it is. Due date's October 16th, so we really are. We're in the last month, which I know my wife is obviously very, very happy to be, closing in on the time with the pregnancy being done. So looking forward to it, obviously, but definitely kind of feeling that crunch and that pressure of all the last things you got to do before bringing the baby home.
Well, you can't let that get in the way of some great sports talk here today.
That's right.
We're going to have a great show, that we're going to be getting into in just a few minutes here on Keeper of the Games. We want to remind you to hit subscribe. That way, every time we have a brand new episode, you'll get a notification. If you'll notice, we drop this episode a day early. That helps me out a lot in my schedule later on this week. And so you never know exactly when a new episode is going to drop. Usually we try to release them on Thursdays, but the last few weeks, really has kind of been all over the place. So the best way to know when we have a new episode of the podcast is to hit subscribe on any of your favorite podcast platforms like iTunes, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, TuneIn Radio, Stitcher, Pocket Cast, and many others. Also, you can also watch full episodes on YouTube and on Facebook by searching for Keeper of the Games. And you can also watch those episodes on our website, cogpod.weebly.com. And of course, you can follow us anytime on Twitter and Instagram at CogPod. That's at KOG Pod. We are going to kick off this episode of Keeper of the Games where else than by talking about the 2-0 Kansas City Chiefs. And we've got I think a lot to discuss as we look back on the Chiefs' overtime 23-20 win against the Los Angeles Chargers on Sunday afternoon. And Weston, I think the first word that comes to mind for the Chiefs in that game is the word ugly. What are your initial thoughts from the Chiefs' Week 2 win against the Chargers?
Yeah, I mean, I think there were some facets of the game that were ugly. We'll definitely talk about the offensive line and some of the issues that they had. But, the thing that I think I was really thinking about with this win throughout the game and kind of, I guess, comparing the feeling I had during this game and the feeling after compared to years in the past with the Chiefs is that, this is what good teams do. You're never going to play perfect football, but good teams find a way to overcome that and still win games. And I don't know that we've been there a lot of times in the past with the Chiefs. Obviously, you won a Super Bowl last year. They had that feeling, but that's where I feel like we're at with this, with this franchise. And the other thing then being also with Patrick Mahomes, you just never feel out of a game, even in moments when you saw the offense struggle. And again, I'm going to use that kind of lightly because it was tied in with the offensive line, not necessarily, in my opinion, the offensive unit as a whole. But that's just the thing about good football teams is it doesn't matter what's going wrong. It doesn't matter how bad they're playing. It doesn't matter what kind of injuries they face. They find a way to get those games, close them out, and finish them off when other teams may just fold and let it go. So that was really I just thought about that over and over several different times throughout that day, that I just didn't feel like we were out of it. And that, hey, if we're this good football team like we think that we are, we got to find a way to win this game.
I saw a stat at the end of the game, and I'm not exactly sure where the stat came from, But I read this and it was mind blowing to me, kind of on your point about Pat Mahomes and never really feeling like you're out of it. Over the last 2 seasons, the Chiefs are 6-0 with Patrick Mahomes when they're losing by 10 points or more. They're 6-0. When they're down by more than 10 points. They have not lost a game in the last 2 years when that happens. So, that does, speak a lot to what you just talked about the resolve of Patrick Mahomes, how dynamic he is, what he can do to, lead the team back from behind. I think if you're a Chiefs fan, though, you really, always want them to be, always from a place when they're ahead as opposed to coming back from behind, but you'll take a win however you can get it. I will say, going back to our last program, our last episode, when we talked about our previews, I even tweeted about this. You talked about our previews for the game against the Chargers. You and I were wrong on a number of counts, as far as, I don't want to say we, overlooked the Chargers, but I don't think we gave them the credit that they deserved, and they do deserve a lot of credit. They're a better football team than I thought they were going to be, and I think they're a better football team than they were last year in a number of areas. And I will say one area where I don't want to say I was correct in, but I did point out was I was interested in seeing the Chiefs offensive line against the linebackers, for the Chargers, and the linebackers for the Chargers absolutely won that matchup for most of the day. The Mitchell Schwartz and, Eric Fisher had a really hard time against Joey Bosa and Melvin Ingram, and they were disruptive all day long, delivering some really hard hits and putting a ton of pressure on Patrick Mahomes.
Yeah, I mean, that was kind of, I guess, surprising in a way. Joey Bosa is an outstanding talent, and I think Melvin Ingram is good, but he's not. He isn't in that tier that Joey Bosa and a few others are. And I was a little bit surprised because Mitchell Schwartz has done so well consistently against some of the top end talent in the league. And then on the flip side, Eric Fisher has done a really, really nice job against that same level of talent, not quite to the level, in my opinion, of Mitchell Schwartz, but they've both done a really solid job. So, I was surprised to see them struggle. But at the same time, like I said, Joey Bosa is just such an outstanding talent. And it goes back to exactly kind of what I talked about when we previewed this game and said, hey, look, that injury is so significant because when you have Joey Bosa and Melvin Ingram, that limits schematically what you can do to help slow those guys down. When they're both healthy, you pretty much have to do like the Chiefs did and put the tackles on an island with top-end pass rushing talent and let them go. Now, I think, and this in part is where I'm shifting the blame a little bit to other members of the offensive line, and that's tough to do without watching the tape, but I suspect because we got beat a little bit more up the middle, I'm drawing a blank on 99 for the Chargers. He had an outstanding game, and it came from a couple different directions. But what happens when Jerry Tillery? He had a really good game. It was very disruptive. But when there's this push up the middle all the time, and you've got defensive tackles that are being disruptive in the middle, well, the quickest point to the quarterback is from point zero of the football, the guy lined up over the football, straight line to the quarterback. So when it's disruptive up the middle, you have to do things to shift there. So now if you're using all three of those interior offensive linemen to essentially block two guys, that limits in what you can do on the edge, where no matter how fantastic your tackles are, typically maybe you have that tackle go, he can kick hard to the outside and knowing that he's got a guard coming and doesn't have to worry about being beat inside. One way or the other. Obviously, you're not doing that more than likely with both defensive ends. But when you have that flexibility, it allows you to create additional protection for your tackles against those top in talent pass rushers. We were getting beat up the middle a lot throughout the day, and I think that kind of forced Andy Reid to say, okay, Schwartz, Fisher, we're going to have to let you guys, play to your high-end talent. And and just kind of sacrifice. And so you saw a mixed match of all sorts of different things that didn't really allow us schematically to do the best job, I think, against this very, very talented. And like you just got, just like you said, I think we all thought, hey, these guys are good, but I was impressed. I think they're a lot better than what folks were giving them credit for. So to me, I think actually it was up the middle that kind of caused the problems moving outwards. And then as we kind of get into the discussion about the offense as a whole, frankly, that was the only issue I saw with this offense on Sunday was Pat just didn't have enough time to either to call the plays they wanted to call or sit in the pocket and go through the progressions and make the reads, make the throws that he wanted to make. It doesn't matter how talented of offensive players you have. If the offensive line can't give you time to run what you want to run, it just will not matter. And that's, to me, it solely lied on that offensive line last Sunday.
Hats off to Gus Bradley, who's the defensive coordinator for the Chargers, especially in the first half and even a little bit later in the game. Patrick Mahomes, like you just mentioned, was under duress a lot, and there were so many different occasions that he had a hard time getting off a clean throw, and the Chargers defense incredibly disruptive, especially early on, in that game. And then obviously, it looked like Andy Reid was able to make some adjustments, to make that work a little bit better. And they were able to take advantage of, the pressure a little bit more, especially in the second half. And then, of course, into overtime. But, I think that this is the norm. I think this is going to be something that the Chiefs will continue to see week in and week out. What that was to me, that was more that game against the Chargers was a little bit more than just a game. I think it was a little bit of a crystal ball into the future of what the Chiefs can expect. They are now the hunted as opposed to the hunter. They are the defending Super Bowl champions. They have a target on their back. I think they've had a target on their back to an extent ever since Patrick Mahomes came in to the league and took over that starting position. But now they are absolutely at the top of the pack. They're absolutely there. And every other team is going to give the Chiefs their best shot. And I'm not saying that otherwise they wouldn't, but there's a little bit of an added motivation for these teams, especially a team like the Chargers, division rivals. They've lost the majority of the games against the Chiefs over the last 4 or 5 seasons. Anthony Lynn, who I think is a pretty solid head coach for the most part, just has not had any luck against Andy Reid. So there was added motivation there for sure for the Chargers. I just think overall, this is the new norm, and something that I think that Chiefs fans have to start to expect is that every time out, there's a chance you're going to get punched in the mouth, and you've got to be ready for it from the opening kick all the way to the end of the game.
Yeah, I think you're definitely right in that sense. And I also think we are entering a new era in the AFC West, because I think the Chargers are talented. We saw the Raiders beat the Saints. I think they're a very talented team too. I think we are still the clear favorite in the division, but I think the division is just getting better as a whole. And a little other side note, I actually really like Drew Lock, and I know he got hurt, and not that I thought that this year was going to be a real competitive year for the Broncos, but I like that the outlook for them moving forward. And the other thing I'll say too is, the one thing about this game is it didn't, while it was I felt like it's the blueprint on how to slow down the Chiefs offense. The thing about that is, though, that blueprint is the same one. It's really the best way to stop any offense ever, and it's incredibly hard to do. Anytime you can put pressure on the quarterback with only rushing, bringing 4 guys. So not stunting linebackers, not bringing guys off the edge, and not to say you're not going to do it at all, but for the most part, to have your front 4 put pressure on that quarterback will slow down and disrupt any and every offense in the NFL. And the Chargers, they've got the front 4 to do it, and there's not a lot of teams that do. So that is going to be the blueprint, I think, in my opinion, is to disrupt the offense with only using that front 4, so you can still have that, high safety over the top of Tyreek Hill, that linebacker sitting in the middle of the field waiting for Travis Kelce. That's the blueprint, but I say that through the lens of it's going to be incredibly hard for teams to be able to replicate that, because it's not something you can scheme up. You have to have the personnel to do it.
On the defensive side of the ball for Kansas City, I would argue that, the defensive effort from start to finish in this game was mediocre, probably at best for Kansas City. They had a really hard time stopping Justin Herbert for a majority of the game, who we didn't even know was going to be starting until a few minutes before game time. You and I spent all this time talking about Tyrod Taylor, and obviously, he was injured and re-aggravated his injury in warmups. Rookie Justin Herbert out of Oregon took over. He's clearly the future quarterback for the Chargers. He's probably a guy that we'll see there for quite a long time. And I was impressed with him overall. Who knows short term, what the quarterback situation will be for Los Angeles. But, Justin Herbert, at least on Sunday, was the guy. And I think he performed pretty well, in that short, warm-up period that he had getting into the game. On top of that, it wasn't just Justin Herbert. It was also the rush for the Chargers. The Chiefs allowed 183 yards on the ground, and Austin Eckler, and they've a couple other running backs that they kind of split time, a little bit in carries in that game, but the Chiefs defense had a hard time stopping the run, stopping Justin Herbert. And you and I, Weston, we've talked week in and week out about our concern for the secondary for Kansas City. And while I do think that there still is some concern there, we just got done talking about how good the Chargers linebackers were in this game. The Chiefs linebackers, I didn't think performed well at all. You really didn't see Anthony Hitchens a whole lot. Ben Neiman got a lot of snaps, and I thought he was awful and had, a couple of penalties that were big on defense for Kansas City. Are you concerned at all for the linebackers for the Chiefs, or is that just kind of an off day for them and just overall, defensively, the Chiefs really didn't have that great of a day?
Yeah, people are going to get tired of me talking about schematics of either an offense or a defense, but I'm not overly concerned yet. And the reason that is, obviously Travarius Ward was out, and then someone else got injured pretty early on in the game, and I'm drawing a blank now. But the secondary is already a problem, right? Then Travarius Ward doesn't play. I think it was it Antonio Hamilton that got hurt early? Anyways,
yeah, I think you're right.
Notwithstanding that, anyways, the secondary is in a position where we have to be doing things schematically to protect the weakest part of our defense. And often,
and also Frank Clark didn't play in the second half too. Yeah.
And so what that does, though, is often puts us in situations where we're running nickel, we're running dime, we're doing a lot of things, again, schematically, that don't help out the linebackers. With that being said, we talked about this when we previewed the season, even the run defense, David Johnson, week 1 in Houston had a good game. Austin Eckler and Joshua Kelly had a good game last week. So it's something that is definitely on my radar, and we struggled with it last year. So I guess I'll say it, maybe this way. We haven't seen anything yet this season to think that they've improved from last year, but I'm not concerned that it has gotten worse just because of the situation we've been dealt with, our secondary being the way it is. I would suspect that Spagnuolo is probably doing a lot of things to, schematically to help out that secondary, so you don't give up that big play and say, look, linebackers, we're gonna leave you on an island. You're gonna have to make some plays because we got to help out this secondary. And if we give up a 4-yard run, I'm okay with that. I don't want to give up the 10, 12, 15-yard passes consistently because we've got these young, inexperienced, or frankly, untalented guys, playing in the secondary. And I think that that's kind of where we're at with that right now, but it is certainly on the radar of things that I'm watching in the next weeks moving forward.
So, by the way, Frank Clark left at halftime with an undisclosed illness. It does sound like he's going to be okay and will probably more than likely play this coming week against the Ravens. Also, as you mentioned, Antonio Hamilton had a groin injury. And then also defensively, Damian Wilson left for a period of time after he put a hit on Justin Herbert, but he came back. And Anthony Hitchens also missed a little bit of time on the sidelines with an undisclosed injury as well. So obviously, you get into overtime. The Chiefs were able to tie the game up, late, on the back of Patrick Mahomes, and then they're able to force it to overtime. And that's where pretty much all hell broke loose. Even before we talk about the heroics of Harrison Butker, there was a curious decision that led to the Chiefs getting the football back on the part of Anthony Lynn, where the Chargers had, I believe they'd gotten a couple of first downs. The Chiefs were able to stop them. I believe it was 4th and 1. And I don't quote me. I think maybe you know more than I do. I think it was somewhere around the 40-yard line of Los Angeles, somewhere right around there at 4th and 1. And Anthony Lynn decided to punt the football back to the Chiefs. I know we're biased because we're Chiefs fans, but in retrospect, obviously hindsight's 2020. Was that the right move by Anthony Lynn? Do you think that if he had to go back and do that again, that he would make the same decision?
God, I don't know. To me, it seemed like a no-brainer to go for that. You do not give that ball to Patrick Mahomes, in my opinion. Yeah. I would assume some of the thought process was the defense had played well, but as football is, once an offense kind of gets things figured out and makes adjustments, and that's exactly how the game flow went, right? It seems like the Chiefs offense kind of figured things out a little bit more, and they felt like they were really kind of rolling there at the end, and it just didn't make sense to give that ball back to Pat, even if you give it to him, on the 40 or 45 about, I think you're right. I mean, you would just think the chances of him getting into field goal range from the 45 were not much different than him starting on his own 20. The only thing that I can kind of think too is it was I'll make a little cross Kansas City reference here. It was almost a Ned Yost like move where he's going to get up in the press conference and say, "I got to trust my guys. I got to trust my defense. I understand that it made this. The numbers said to do this, but I'm going to trust my guys. I'm going to trust my defense." That's the only thing I can kind of think. At least that's what I was thinking was kind of going through my head at the time. So it seemed crazy, and it's funny because we talk about that decision that Anthony Lynn made, and then they punt the ball to Kansas City. Andy Reid gets that ball, and it was an overtime, right? I'm pretty sure it was an overtime when Andy Reid went for it on 4th and 1. Yeah, 4th and 1, and the balls on Andy Reid to call a play to Darwin Thompson, the littlest player on the Kansas City Chiefs roster. He turns around and hands the ball to. And here's the thing that I think people missed. I know a lot of people were like, oh my God, to call a running play to Darwin Thompson on 4th and 1. Not only that, he pulled Kelechi Osemele from the off guard position. And I mean, I don't know if they were supposed to be trapping someone. He didn't trap anyone. He went up into the hole and met a backer, I think, there. But to pull a guard too on 4th and 1 and give that opportunity for a defensive lineman to kind of get in his hip pocket and blow something up in the backfield, I can't imagine calling that. So I mean, hats off to Andy Reid for trusting his guys to make that play work.
Yeah, when you compare Andy Reid and Anthony Lynn, the more aggressive coach won the game. Yeah. The more conservative coach, lost the game. And, if I'm Anthony Lynn, I mean, my counter to what you just said about, and I agree about, I'm sure Anthony would get up there and maybe he did in the press conference and say, I got to trust my guys on defense. If you really trusted your guys on defense, you'd go for it. Because if you don't get it, then you trust them enough to stop the Chiefs from getting into field goal range. But, I'm sure that, that was the decision at the time. Obviously, the Chiefs were able to take advantage of it. And to your point, talking about how it seemed like the offense throughout the game sort of started to figure it out a little bit more, and there were some adjustments that were made. Tyreek Hill was very, very quiet in the first half. He picked up a long touchdown pass that really got the Chiefs back in the game. And I know that we're talking about overtime, but I completely forgot to mention in regulation that 2-point conversion completion to McCole Hardman was just incredible. And that was able to, tie the game for the Chiefs at that point. Now obviously in overtime, once the Chiefs got the ball back, it was up to Harrison Butker, who had already tied the Chiefs franchise record earlier in the game with a 58-yard field goal, and he had to do it again in overtime. Let's hear from Harrison himself after the game as he was getting ready for the kick and then the re-kick and then the kick after that actually won the game for the Chiefs.
I think I just got a little bit more angry every kick. So the first one, I thought they called timeout, and then I realized it was a false start. But going into the second one, they called timeout again. So in my head, that's 2 timeouts. And then I think I even looked at the Chargers sideline because I was like, come on, man, I'm trying to finish this game and get back to Kansas City. So that third one, I felt like was my best kick. And I mean, to have 2 practice kicks before that is only going to help you. And I'm just really happy that we were able to stay through from the blocked extra point. We have a great field goal unit, James Winchester and Tommy holding the ball, and we were able to put it through. But that's stuff that we do in practice, and we were able to transfer it over to the game.
And then let's hear from Harrison Butker talking about the length of kicks that he was attempting during halftime.
Last season, I don't know if I would have been as consistent from that distance. If you look back to 2017 against the Texans, same turf, like I said, 49-yarder at the end of the game, barely made it over. So I definitely have a stronger leg than I did in 2017. Last year, I had a pretty strong leg, but did not have the accuracy. This offseason, I was able to make a lot of long kicks, and then going into training camp, I really wanted to show the coaches I could be consistent from that distance. I thought I was in training camp, and then a day like today where you're indoors, basically no wind, I was able to hit from 67 before the game and 70 at halftime. Coach Tobe knew that, and he told Coach Reid that if we get to the 40-yard line, we'll be good. That'd be a 58-yarder, and I can just swing easy. I don't need to change anything. But last year, I don't think I would have made all 3 of those. Hopefully, I would have made the last one, but I definitely feel stronger and more accurate this season.
A 67-yard field goal attempt during halftime, a 70-yard field goal attempt during halftime. And then, but what I think is most mind-blowing out of all of this is a 58-yard field goal. And he says the words, "I can swing easy" on that one. Weston, you talked about the balls on Andy Reid. How about the balls on Harrison Butker during this game against the Chargers?
Tommy, I will promise you, I have never in my life, and this is the first time ever, and I don't know if it'll ever happen again, that I'm going to use the word badass with associating it with a kicker. And one of my best friends of all time was our kicker in college, and I grew up with this man, and there's nothing he's ever done that I've used that term with, but Harrison Butker, that was incredible. Have you seen the video of him kicking that third one where it's the video right on him where he kicks the ball, everybody else is watching it, and he turns around and gives the Steph Curry are you not entertained? Incredible.
Yeah. He knew.
He did. I mean, it was in kicker. I feel like you hear kickers a lot. They talk about, you hit one and it's solid. You know where it's going. It absolutely, he knew it was in. But Tommy, often you have questions for me. I've got a question for you.
Okay.
What is stronger, Harrison Butker's leg or Patrick Mahomes' arm?
That's a really good question. I think if you were to ask me before this game, I probably would have said Patrick Mahomes' arm. But if Harrison Butker is making 70-yard field goals, during halftime, then it might be Butker's leg. I'd like to see a competition between the two of them to figure out whether Patrick can throw the ball further than Harrison can kick it.
Yeah, I mean, just seriously, so incredible. But I mean, that was it feels good to know that Kansas City has that position that is so important, really stable for the next few years. And I mean, I think he's in the conversation, right? He has to be of the best kicker in the NFL right now. I mean, it takes a lot to really, you got to be paying attention to a lot of games and a lot of things to notice and compare the kickers. But I just don't know that there's another kicker right out there right now that are doing the things that Harrison Butker is doing, and at such a high, consistent level. So incredible to have him right now. I was telling my wife I may have to get a kicker's jersey. Maybe I'm going to get a Butker jersey. I don't know. I've never done. I don't know. He's just incredible play and just an incredible moment and pretty cool way to end that game.
Well, you look at these NFL teams that they have trouble keeping kickers, and they're inconsistent. I think consistency is the key word there. If you know that week in and week out, you put this guy out there and he's going to make it, and you don't really have to worry about it, that's huge. That's gold in the NFL. And I don't think it's any surprise at all that the top two teams in the NFL right now have the top two kickers in the NFL right now. You've got Harrison Butker for the Chiefs and Justin Tucker for the Ravens. Are probably 1 and 2 or 2 and 1, however you want to rank them. They're probably the top two kickers in the league and the two top teams. Now, speaking of those teams, they're facing off against each other on Monday Night Football. It's going to be a while before the game from when this episode drops. So we've got a ways to go. This episode drops on Wednesday. The game's not until Monday, but we won't have another episode between now and then. So it's kind of our brief Ravens preview. And what I thought was really interesting, we talked about how the Chiefs are now the hunted, not the hunter. The Chiefs actually opened the game as 3-point underdogs, the opening betting line, which really surprised me. I know the Ravens are a really good football team. They're one of the best in the NFL for sure, and they've had a great start to the season so far. It's surprising to me. I know the Chiefs didn't have their best stuff against the Chargers, but it is surprising that the Chiefs opened as the underdog. Are you surprised by that?
No, not at all. I mean, Vegas is probably still giving notch just first of all because it's a road game, which it just doesn't matter that much.
Yeah,
it doesn't. But I bet Vegas is still giving a slight nod just for that. But secondly, and probably the more important thing is health, right? I mean, Kansas City's not at full strength, and I think majority of people out there think if you've got the Ravens' best and healthy lineup versus the Chiefs' best and healthy lineup, that this game, that'd be a toss-up type game. So, it doesn't really surprise me that Kansas City's opening as a 3-point dog. And frankly, I mean, the Ravens have absolutely rolled in their first two games. I don't think they've played as quality of opponents, but they've absolutely rolled in their first two games. So it'll be a fantastic matchup on Monday Night Football.
You want to talk about how rare it is for the Chiefs to be underdogs going into a game. Now, obviously, that line can change and shift and adjust, but right now, the Chiefs are an underdog. This is just the 7th time that the Chiefs have been an underdog in a regular season game with Mahomes as their starter. Of those 6 previous games, 5 of them came during the first 11 weeks of the 2018 season, and 1 of them came during the 2017 regular season finale, which was the very first start of Patrick Mahomes' career. So the majority of those games when the Chiefs have been underdogs, that was early in the Mahomes tenure under center for Kansas City. So it's pretty rare, especially recently, for the Chiefs to be underdogs. And we talked about in our preview about at that time, the Chiefs were favored in like 15 of 16 games this season. So they are coming in, at least from a betting perspective, as an underdog, but I think it's a pretty even matchup, and I agree with you. It's going to be a solid game. Lamar Jackson is outstanding. We all know that. I don't think that. I think there are some quarterbacks out there that are disrespected some. I think Russell Wilson, to an extent, is disrespected. I think Kyler Murray is disrespected some. Even Deshaun Watson is disrespected some. But I don't think Lamar Jackson is. I think he is perfectly respected as one of the top quarterbacks in the league. And obviously, we know about their dynamic offense with Mark Ingram and now with J.K. Dobbins as their rookie running back, and their wideouts, and Mark Andrews is the tight end. I mean, they've got some pretty electric skill players on this team. So I'm really looking forward to this matchup quite a bit. And of course, you've got the 2018 MVP and the 2019 MVP facing off against each other early on Monday Night Football. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's obviously I don't know if we're going to get into predictions. It feels kind of a little early in the week. You just don't know how things shake out. But I've predicted every week. Actually, both of us really have predicted every week points. I don't see any way that there's not a ton of points in this football game. I think it's going to be a classic Monday night matchup where you see two, frankly, probably two future Hall of Fame quarterbacks and two, faces of the league for the next 10 to 15 years are going to be, I think, just going back and forth in this game. And I have hopes and expectations with a different result of the Chiefs. What was it, 2018 game against the Rams, where there were, I can't even remember the final score, but it was right after the California wildfires, and it was just points all across the board. I've got hopes and high expectations that we see a game like that, but obviously with the Chiefs coming out victor.
Yeah, I think that game, I don't remember. It was something like 56-49.
Yeah,
I mean, it
I think
was
that's right.
like something stupid like that. Let's do predictions very quickly, though. I know it's a ways out, but it's kind of our, I guess, tradition here on this show to do that. So I'll start. I obviously think that points are going to be big as well. I'm not sure it's going to be quite like that, but I'm going to say 42-35. I think the Chiefs get a touchdown victory against the Ravens.
Whew, I was gonna say 42-38. So I'm gonna change it then, and I'm gonna say 49-42.
Okay.
I'm gonna stick with my points and 49-42 Chiefs, obviously.
Okay, fair enough. So we both think that the Chiefs will win by a touchdown. So obviously we'll see how that goes, and we'll have a recap of the Monday night game against the Ravens on the next episode. And very quickly, before we move away from the NFL, a couple quick AFC West notes. Obviously, as you mentioned, Weston, the Raiders got a big Monday Night Football win against the Saints at home. They're a pretty good football team, and it'll be interesting to see how their season progresses. We know about the Chargers, and then the Broncos. They lost. And they also lost Drew Lock for a few weeks, and Blake Bortles will be the new quarterback for the Denver Broncos. The Broncos signed him to a deal to replace Lock, at least in the interim. So it'll be interesting to see how Blake Bortles does in Denver. Any thoughts on him being the new QB for the Broncos?
I like Blake Bortles, but it's only because of my bromance with Pardon My Take. So he's just a good guy to root for. I from a competitive standpoint, I think he brings similar probably skill set as Drew Lock. I think Drew Lock, I like the prospect of Drew Lock moving forward, but I think as far as this season would have gone, I think it's probably a pretty similar skill set that they have.
Fair enough. Well, that is our NFL update here on Keeper of the Games. Let's get into some college football. As of right now, at the recording of this show, this can certainly change between now and Saturday, but as of right now, both Kansas and Kansas State are scheduled to play football, but both of those games have some COVID-19 concerns. The Jayhawks are scheduled to play Baylor. It will be Baylor's opening game, assuming that it actually takes place. But the Bears have had their own COVID concerns to start the season, with several games being canceled, including their home opener against Louisiana Tech, and then last week's game against Houston. It does look like right now that game is scheduled to be played against the Jayhawks. However, Baylor is having some issues with the minimum thresholds of different positions, having the number of guys to be able to fill those positions. But right now, it does look like the game hopefully will happen between KU and Baylor. And then the same sort of thing is going on with the Sooners at Oklahoma. They're dealing with some COVID issues as well. The biggest thing is that, Lincoln Riley in Oklahoma, hoping they've got enough players at certain positions to be able to field the team against the Wildcats. Both KU and K-State are underdogs, and pretty severe underdogs in week 2. Let's start with the KU Baylor game, assuming that both of these games are played, Weston. Do you think that there's any way that KU is able to cover that spread? I think right now it's 18 points against Baylor, or do you think that, I know it's hard considering the Bears have not played a game yet, but do you think Baylor just completely run rules the Jayhawks out of Waco?
Yeah, I'm looking right now. It looks like I'm seeing the spread at 16.5. I think it's possible, and I'm only going to say that just because the unknown of Baylor with the new staff, and we haven't seen them play yet. But with that being said, also kind of on the flip side of that, there's no tape for Kansas to really prepare on Baylor, which makes it even harder for Kansas to prep coming off an already bad loss. So it's just hard to really know. I think the thing I'm really kind of looking forward to in this game is seeing which route Kansas goes, whether they're going to stick with Thomas McVitie, or maybe I should say go back to Thomas McVitie. He was the starter and looked like he had kind of won the job, got hurt. Miles Kendrick came in and played pretty well. So really which route they go, whether Thomas McVitie or Miles Kendrick moving forward.
Yeah, I know that Les Miles had talked a little bit about, McVitie, and I think he had suffered an injury in the opener against Coastal Carolina. That's why we didn't see him a whole lot in the second half or at all in the second half, and it was pretty much exclusively Miles Kendrick. But Les Miles said that, if McVitie is healthy and ready to go, then we can expect to see him out there. But there was no clarity on if it's just going to be him or if the Jayhawks are going to stick to the two quarterback system. I don't know, and we don't have to get into a huge discussion about it right now, but I'd love to get your thoughts on that two quarterback system as a former player. As a fan, I hate it. I wish that the Jayhawks and any team that has two quarterbacks that they're swapping in and out would just stick with one guy. I know that McVitie and Kendrick have different skill sets and they're different kinds of quarterbacks, and it gives a different kind of look for your offense. But at the same time, I think that there's something to be said for consistency and being able to let a guy get into his rhythm and be able to let him drive the bus. But as a former player, do you see any kind of issue with the Jayhawks going back and forth between two quarterbacks?
Yeah, I absolutely hate it. I hated it as a teammate. I always thought it felt like the coaching staff not being able to pick a guy and or coddling someone's feelings and giving them some playing time when you just pick a guy and go. I think there's absolutely something to be said about continuity, and particularly as I played defense in college, I loved when they'd go to a two quarterback system then because the predictability is through the roof. It almost always is you've got a quarterback that is a little bit more pass friendly and a quarterback that's a little bit more run friendly, and all that does is create tendencies for a defense to know when whichever quarterback is in the game. It's so easy to look at that. It's a lot different to necessarily, you have your keys and if it's the tendencies of one particular wide receiver or a running back, but a quarterback, that's always you're always aware of which quarterback's in the game, and you're going to very well know his tendencies. And I just think it creates such a simple concept, for a defense to kind of help defend against. And I've hated it forever as a teammate. And as a fan too, but mostly it just doesn't. I don't think it makes sense. I did hear Les Miles say that their goal is to only be a one quarterback team. Sure. It's just a matter of figuring it out, which I guess I can kind of understand that. But I still think as a coach, it's your job to figure out who it is and do it well. Like that's what you're getting paid to do. I hate it.
And you're always going to hear coaches say, well, both of these guys are really good and not one of them can separate themselves from the other. As a fan, as a pessimistic fan, my thought process is neither guy's good enough to have to run the offense by themselves. They need to have somebody else to swap in and out. So I definitely agree with you there. On the defensive side of the ball for Kansas with this matchup against Baylor, assuming it happens, I do think it's tacky to talk about the Kansas Jayhawks defense taking advantage of a COVID-19 situation, but that is kind of what the Kansas defense has to look forward to. One of the big issues with the Baylor Bears, according to their athletic director, Mac Rhodes, is the offensive line for Baylor and how depleted it has been because of COVID-19. His quote was, within this particular position group, we can't take on any more hot water. We'll get some young men back before the Kansas game, not a week before, not 5 days before, but shortly before that could be ready. So we're hopeful. So right now it does look like that offensive line group for the Baylor Bears is struggling through COVID-19, which of course you have to think that, the Jayhawks defense will game plan for a little bit. The other thing to keep in mind too, not only is there no tape on the Baylor Bears, but also this is a brand new head coach for Baylor. Of course, Matt Rule left to go to the Carolina Panthers in the NFL. Dave Aranda is the first-year coach for Baylor. So you don't really know a lot about what his techniques are, what his schemes are, what his playbook looks like. So really the Jayhawks are kind of going in blind. My original question was about the spread, and I'll answer it. I don't think that there's any possible way that the Jayhawks cover the spread. I know that's pretty pessimistic of me, but I think that, especially considering that the Jayhawks are going to have a hard time game planning for this particular matchup, I just think Baylor has too much firepower, and I think that they completely blow that spread out of the water.
Yeah, I guess I kind of came from the approach of just, hey, we don't really know what Baylor is yet. But I think you're right. I think it's going to be tough. In my anticipation to some degree would be that spread does have the COVID concerns built in. Any good, bookmaker is looking at those things and trying as best as they can to factor that in. But you're right. I mean, it's just like what we saw with Kansas City on Sunday could be very well the Achilles heel to Baylor come Saturday. Is no matter how great of an offense you have, if your offensive line consistently is allowing the defense, especially a front four where you can sit everybody else back, allowing the front four of the Kansas Jayhawks to disrupt the timing of the offense and disrupt the play calling or plays that you'd otherwise want to run, that could be seriously problematic. And I'm certainly not going to predict Kansas to win, but that's kind of the path I see to them maybe covering the spread.
I think my final score for the Jayhawks and Baylor, I'm going to say Baylor 45 and KU 13. That's my prediction for the final score. I don't know if you have a prediction that you want to share for this game.
Well, I said it's possible that they cover. I'm going to say 38-21, which if we're looking at a 16.5 spread, they still miss it. But 38-21 is kind of where I'm feeling here.
You're more optimistic than I am, especially with that particular matchup. The other game in the state with K-State and the Sooners, this game might have more COVID issues than even the Jayhawks and Baylor game is concerned. And we talked about some of the COVID concerns that the Sooners have had. Lincoln Riley has talked about that, but it might be even more dire for the Wildcats. This coming from GoPowerCat.com's Tim Fitzgerald. Sources are saying that the Wildcats may not have enough players to even field a team at Oklahoma on Saturday. Now, the team is believed to be hopeful and optimistic about their chances to participate, but at this point, it looks like there are some big troubles there as far as numbers are concerned for the Wildcats to field the squad. That's definitely not a good sign when you're traveling on the road to Norman to take on the powerful Sooners. You got to have, your full arsenal of weapons. And even if the game is played, it doesn't look like Kansas State will have that right now. I believe maybe the spread has changed, but at last I saw it was 28. And I think it's probably stayed there. Do you think there's any way that, knowing what we know about COVID and going up against the Sooners, that the Wildcats can cover that spread?
Man, I would say it'd be hard pressed at full strength, especially seeing what Arkansas State's passing game did to Kansas State last week or 2 weeks ago, I guess. I would be very skeptical that they can slow down this. I'll say historic Oklahoma passing game over the last 10 years. They've been one of the premier passing games really across the country. So I think throwing in the COVID concerns, I think, only makes it even more that this game could be an absolute rout. Now, I did see, obviously, Oklahoma having some COVID concerns themselves. Lincoln Riley said that he had to actually stand in for scout team and runs. I think he said was running some plays with scout team because they were short some guys. So I bet Lincoln Riley probably still has a little bit of game left in him, though.
Yeah, and on that same note, for the Wildcats, Chris Kleiman said, and this was his quote on the Big 12 teleconference, last week when we broke into scout teams, we had a tight end playing tackle for the offensive scouts, a fullback playing guard, and a defensive end playing another tackle because we were down that many numbers. So it's definitely not ideal on either side, but I think that if you're comparing who you'd rather be in this situation, you'd rather be the Sooners. And I know it's pessimistic. I don't see the Wildcats covering the spread either against the Sooners. So my prediction, I'm going to say Oklahoma puts up a lot of points. I'm going to say they score 52 points, and I think that the Wildcats score, I'm going to say 20. I'm going to say 52-20. OU beats the Wildcats.
Yeah, I mean, I think that Oklahoma gets. I'm going to say 59 to. I'll give K-State 28 because I think Oklahoma maybe starts rotating some guys in and out and kind of giving that JV squad, I'll say, a chance, and I think it's going to be rough for K-State and really, well, maybe to some degree theirs, but not no fault of their own. I think that with the health concerns, it's just hard to play at this level without being full strength. It's not like the NFL where all these guys are incredible talents. Some of these colleges, especially like if you're not a powerhouse like Oklahoma, you're scraping to get 22 really good guys that you're hoping can go compete in the Big 12 and potentially win it. But programs like that often have a harder time, filling that depth chart underneath that because you're just not getting the full fledged of talent like some of these other schools are getting. So I think it really, really, really hurts them that they're going to be playing with some second or third, string run of guys.
Kansas State travels to Waco to take on the Baylor Bears Saturday at 6:30 p.m. That game is on ESPNU. And the Wildcats travel to Norman to take on the Sooners of Oklahoma. That game kicks off at 11 a.m., nationally televised on Fox, assuming that both of those games actually happen. And I know you and I are relatively pessimistic. It might be a weekend to skip watching both in-state schools. I might have to do that. We'll have to kind of wait and see on that. Let's shift gears very quickly and talk some college basketball. So we talked about the start of the college basketball season on the last episode of our podcast. And Gregg Marshall from the Wichita State Shockers, within the last 24 hours, had his opening press conference about the start of the season, talked about a whole bunch of different things, including the newcomers and some of the transfers and returning players, and overall about his thoughts on the upcoming season for the Shockers. One of the biggest questions about the Shockers from last season coming into this season was the overall team chemistry, which wasn't great when the Shockers finished up the last season, and we saw a record number of players transfer out of Gregg Marshall's program. So in that opening press conference, he touched on what he thinks the team chemistry will be this upcoming season for the Shockers.
It seems great to me, but it always seems great to be honest, and that's what the guys say just about every year. But obviously, we know that we didn't have – last year was the first year in my whole coaching career that our chemistry was bad. And, no one really knew what to do, how to fix it, and it just didn't – it was a bad mixture, if you will. This year, I've had multiple players, returners and new guys, say how much different this is and how much better it is. So I didn't see any problems last year at this time. So I just think they can talk the talk, but we got to walk the walk. We've got to support each other. We've got to pull for each other. There's 16 young men on this team, and they've all got to be pulling in the same direction. Whether you start or come off the bench, whether you play 32 minutes or 12 minutes. It's about Wichita State being the absolute best that they can be. And, I love the chemistry so far, and I think that it will continue because, again, they're great young men. But when adversity hits, that's when you start to figure out what kind of chemistry you've got. And everybody goes through some type of adversity, and we will certainly go through our share of adversity. But I like the makeup of this team. We don't have 10 underclassmen, 5 freshmen, 5 sophomores like last year. We have it a little more well-balanced, and we've got a lot of upperclassmen that have some leadership ability as opposed to just Jamie last year. And so hopefully we can continue with the good vibes that we have going on.
I think that, those are a couple things to take away from, that little, that quote from Gregg Marshall. Number one, I think it's the right approach to be able to say, I really like the team, but I do recognize how bad the chemistry was last year. And so I can say that it's really good now. But when adversity hits and when bad things happen, then obviously we'll see. It's kind of like you can talk the talk, but can you walk the walk? We'll see how, that chemistry actually holds up under pressure for the Shockers. The other thing, too, that I think is a good takeaway is just to remember that this Shocker team is more mature and older now than it was a season ago. There were so many underclassmen. And like Coach Marshall said, it's a more balanced squad now. There are more veterans on the team. There are more mature guys on the team. And so I think that's obviously got to help with the team chemistry. I know that we're a little bit of a ways away from the start of the season, but did anything that Coach Marshall say right there sort of resonate with you as far as what we can look forward to a Shocker season?
Well, I think you hit on a good point about, hey, a little bit older, but also, with some young talent coming in that they're really excited about. And it wasn't necessarily in those remarks, but I also heard him mention he was talking about Chance, trying to blank on his last name, Chance Jenkins, who's coming in as a freshman out of Newport News, Virginia, and he compared him to Ja Morant. Now, he was very clear to say, hey, I'm not saying he is Ja Morant, Ja Morant being the NBA Rookie of the Year this year, but that's still a lofty comparison and kind of an exciting comparison. And then I hear something like that and wrapping it in with what you're talking about, how there's a combination of, not necessarily senior leadership, but older, been in the, stuck around in the program type leadership combined with the talent of some of these, young raw guys could be a very good combination for the Shockers going into the 2020-2021 season.
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, we talked on the last episode about how the schedules are up in the air now that we know when the start date for the season will be. And, the Shockers were scheduled to play in the Battle for Atlantis, and it looks like that's moving to South Dakota. And then obviously the non-conference schedule is all kind of up in the air right now. And there are several games that are pretty marquee for the non-conference schedule for the Shockers that we just don't know at this point if they're going to be played, when they're going to be played, where they're going to be played, what that's going to look like. I did see, and I was going to look this up because I want to make sure that I don't misspeak on this, but I did see that the American Conference did make an announcement about men's basketball, or about the basketball schedule. And I want to say it was something about that there would be a couple of conference games that would happen actually in December for the conference. So they're actually starting the conference season a little bit early. Don't quote me on that. I don't have that information right in front of me, but I do think I read that. So who knows what's going to end up happening with the non-conference schedule for the Shockers. It could very well be that we're in the middle of conference play, in the month of December. So, everything's kind of up in the air at this point. But one thing is clear for Gregg Marshall and the Shockers. They're going to need better team chemistry. They're going to need to be able to come together a little bit better consistently week in and week out, game in and game out, than they did a season ago. That's just a given.
Yeah, no, I mean, absolutely. I mean, that's, and that's, like you said, I mean, that's what he touched on, but that's also what he had to say, right? After what happened in the offseason, he has to come in front of that podium and say the team chemistry already seems better, blah, 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 blah. But he did a good job of pointing out that all it is words, and we've got to be able to put a product on the floor. And that's exactly what, what we're saying here and what he's echoing. So, I think they understand that, and we'll have to see, come December.
Well, yeah, we'll definitely keep an eye on that for sure. As we get closer to the college basketball season, we'll have more discussion about the Shockers and, of course, the other in-state D1 teams as we get closer to the start of the season. All right, a little bit of talk about baseball here. There's really not much to talk about. We mentioned the Royals on the last episode, what the Royals had to do in the final week of the season to make a final push for the playoffs. And they have not done that. They haven't really even come close to that. As of right now, the Royals stand at 22-32 at the recording of this episode. And last I looked, as we're recording, they were in the middle of playing against the Cardinals and they were losing. I'm not sure if you have that score up in front of you.
They lost.
If it's gone final. They lost. Okay, so now they're 22-33. I was looking, Weston, at the wild card, the expanded wild card standings for the American League. And, they still have the Royals at 22-32. They weren't at that time mathematically eliminated from the wild card, but they were the last team that, could possibly not be eliminated. That's probably changed, I would guess, with this loss, but the Royals were right on the cusp. What went wrong in this last week for Kansas City? They had an opportunity to be able to make a run against it. We talked about the schedule not being super difficult for the Royals in this last week. And it really feels like to me they squandered that opportunity.
This is going to be, you keep saying I'm the optimistic one. This may be going to be a pessimistic take from me, but frankly, I don't think anything went wrong, Tommy. I think they kind of were who we thought they were throughout the season. Yes, there was some good moments, and we talked about they have a soft schedule at the end, and there's a chance to do it. But did we think that they were? No, not really. I don't think necessarily anything went wrong. I think this is just where this ball club's at right now. And it's going to be about building for 2021, about building for 2022. But quick shout out, because he's one of my favorite players. Salvador Perez is having a fantastic season. Yeah. I wish he would have got through all of the short season. Particularly a couple things to note: on base percentage of 374 for a guy who strikes out a lot and does not like to take walks has been fantastic. He's slugging 635. He's never slugged greater than 495, and his OPS is 1,000 basically, and his OPS had never been greater than 834. So really put together, I know a small sample size, but really exciting to see as Salvi gets older and coming off an injury that he bounced back, and you can, hopefully expect, 2, 3, 4, 5 more years of, very, very good baseball from Salvador Perez.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head with Salvi. I'd like to see him win the Comeback Player of the Year award in the American League, because not only did he come back at a good level, he came back at a great level for the Royals and was really one of the few bright spots for this Royals team in this shortened season. In a future episode, I think, especially once the offseason hits, we can talk about what the future plans are for the Royals in the offseason, what things are going to look like opening day 2021. We've talked a lot about the pitching staff. We'll take a look at the offense. I think that there's probably a pretty solid chance Alex Gordon is going to retire and is, not going to come back. So there are some different things that we can obviously discuss and talk about. If my math is correct, I do think that the Royals are mathematically eliminated with that loss against the Cardinals. The final wild card team are the Toronto Blue Jays with a record of 28-27. The Royals are 22-33. So they're 6 games back with 5 to go. So I think that that's correct. I think that with that loss that just happened, right as we were recording the show, I think that does mathematically eliminate the Royals from playoff contention, and we can start to look ahead to 2021 on a future episode of Keeper of the Games. Let's go ahead and get into our Wichita Whiparound here on this episode, and we're talking prep football. The first 2 weeks of the prep football season, Weston, you and I we've not had our A game talking about Wichita Metro High School football. I think this week is going to be a little bit different, because I don't know about you, I've got my prep ready, I guess prep for prep. I'm ready to rock and roll and talk about some high school football. What about you?
Yeah, let's do it.
So the big story that we talked about last week on the show was the matchup against Derby and Bishop Carroll. That was going to be the game of the week and maybe even the game of the year in the Wichita Metro. Derby remains undefeated all time against Bishop Carroll. They were able to get the victory against Bishop Carroll. That they've never lost. That didn't change on last Friday night either for Derby. So that moves Derby to 3-1 on the season. And so I think that's big. Obviously, Derby stumbled in week number 1, but they were able to get that win. And Bishop Carroll's a good football team this season for sure. And Derby was able to get the win 35-21.
Yeah, and especially for Derby, they traveled far north where, to get that first loss that they had against Mill Valley, coming back and kind of reasserting their dominance on the Wichita Metro, I think probably is a big boost of confidence for them, and makes them feel comfortable really moving forward the rest of the season.
Yeah, without a doubt. Derby, their next game is scheduled to be played against Salina South. Now, there are some COVID concerns in the prep world as well around Wichita that does impact Derby. So there were reports earlier in the week that Derby would not be playing Salina South due to COVID issues and quarantine and contact tracing and that sort of thing. But they did put out an announcement on Monday night that Friday's football game against Salina South is still on despite recent positive tests among players. This game against Salina South, Weston, would be Derby's home opener. They played their first 3 games on the road And so this would be, a chance to get back home in front of their rabid fans. I don't know if you've ever been to a Derby home football game, but it is packed. And it is a great environment. Now, obviously, with no fans or fewer fans, that's not going to be, as the same, obviously, for the Panthers this time around. But I think it's got to feel good to at least get back home when they have not played in their home field yet.
Yeah, absolutely, and certainly I hope that they can get this game played, because that will almost kind of be like a defeating moment in and of itself after you grind out 3 road games. To be all prepared to get your home opener, play on your home field, and then not to have it happen would be deflating, I think, to some degree. So certainly hope they get it all, get this game played and everything goes smoothly.
The other COVID concern in the Wichita Metro is in Hayesville, as campus high school's upcoming 2 football games are canceled. So that's this weekend against May South and the first weekend in October against Andover. And as of right now, the JV and freshman games are still scheduled, but because of cases on the team for the varsity team for campus, the upcoming 2 games are canceled. I think that this is probably... It's going to continue. It's probably going to happen among multiple programs, as the season goes on. And it's part of the reality. It's just something that's going to have to be dealt with as it comes up. But as of right now, campus, they will not be playing the next 2 weeks. So yeah, definitely a big deal COVID wise for the Hayesville School District.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. You really hit it. I mean, that's just going to happen throughout the season. And I think good teams are going to prepare for these disruptions in the normal programming of their football season, and they're just going to have to deal with it and kind of move forward.
A couple of other updates from week number 3 in the prep world. So Wichita South, they beat Wichita North on Saturday afternoon. The final score was 56-0. So this is the second straight week that Wichita South has shut out their opponent and have beat them by a margin of 50 points or more. They beat Southeast 52-0 last week, and they won against North 56-0. So Weston, we always talk about, the dominant programs in the City League. And, I think Northwest has a great program. We've talked about them quite a bit on this program. There are a couple of other teams in the City League that historically are very strong. Wichita South, I think, is making a case for being one of those dominant teams in the City League this season.
Yeah, I think the only thing that kind of overshadows this victory for them is that, it was 5 days prior when Wichita East put up 80 on North. I think, sadly, I think North is just a very, very bad football team. But you're right. I mean, South there still takes, it takes the game to be played and to get those 56 points on the board. And I think there's a lot of talent. But I think just kind of what's overshadowing right now is that, hey, let's see you go out and do it against somebody who's competing at a little bit higher level right now than what we've seen. But I think they're definitely playing at a level. Wichita South, that is playing at a level that we haven't really seen out of them in the last few years in the Wichita Metro.
Yeah, to your point, Wichita East beat Wichita North last week. 80-0 was the final score in that game. Heights took down West 17-7. And then just a couple of other points to make here around the Wichita Metro. So Cheney, they took down Garden Plain. That was an easy win for Cheney, 44-7. And then also Andover Central, they were playing their first game in a brand new stadium. They are unbeaten as they beat Goddard Eisenhower 45-31. Looking ahead this weekend in the Wichita City League and the surrounding areas, you've got Wichita Heights scheduled. They're on the road against Wichita North, who obviously they've had a pretty rough go at it the first couple weeks of the season. Southeast is on the road to take on Wichita West. East is on the road to take on South. Of course, we talked about Salina South playing Derby, so that's happening also. And then, from there you get into 5A matchups. We talked about how campus and May South, that game's canceled. Dodge City is on the road to take on Bishop Carroll. And then, from there, obviously, several other big games like Andover on the road against Goddard. So, yeah, another big weekend, big matchup here for the Wichita Metro. Some of these games are taking place on Thursday night. Others are taking place on Friday night. And again, we'll have another full update on the results of that on the next episode. Any other updates or anything you want to touch on in the world of prep sports?
Yeah, Tommy, I think you missed the big shout out to your alma mater, Clearwater, putting up 61 against Mulvane, beating them 61-14. And I was looking for a score. Andell putting up, matching that, putting up 63 against Wellington. Wellington beating them 63-7. So giving a shout out to our alma maters there. Got to get their scores. When you got two guys podcasting that went to your schools, you get your scores shouted out.
There you go. Yeah, congratulations to, I guess, both the Indians, both the Clearwater Indians and the Andell Indians for their victories, respectively, last week. So we'll have another update on all of that, the next games on the next episode of Keeper of the Games. One other quick topic in our Wichita Whip Around before we move on and wrap the show up. We obviously had Scott Welsh from Crestview Country Club on the program last week to talk about the Wichita Open, which is scheduled to tee off on Thursday at Crestview Country Club on the Corn Ferry Tour. Everything as of right now is still a go for this tournament. So, obviously no fans, which is a bummer. Scott talked about that quite a bit on the last episode. But Roy Turner, who is the director of the Wichita Open, was asked about COVID testing and what that's going to look like as the Wichita Open is about to get underway.
Most of our tents this year are built about for the testing of people. And we expect to test as many as 500 people that come on the course this year, players, caddies, volunteers, people who serve coffee. It's better to be safe than sorry, but the PGA men, it's mandatory that we do go through all this for those people. And so far it's been very safe, and I'm sure this is going to be like Fort Knox, I think.
Yeah, he thinks it's going to be like Fort Knox out there as far as, the security and the protocols and the testing and all of that. 500 some people tested for COVID at Crestview Country Club to make sure that the players and the caddies and the volunteers and, everybody that makes this tournament possible is absolutely safe. And I think that's what you have to do to ensure that an event like this can go on as scheduled. One thing I did read, Weston, is that the Wichita Police will have a pretty strong presence at Crestview just to make sure that nobody who is not supposed to be there actually shows up and tries to get on the grounds. So they're really taking this safety thing seriously to make sure that there's not any kind of outbreak.
Yeah, it's good to know that they're doing that. And I think, obviously, this year, notwithstanding the incredible circumstances, good to know that Wichita has the ability to put forth these measures to host an event like this when unusual things happen. I think, again, it's just another showcase for the city of Wichita saying, hey, we can do these things, meet any measures that a company, a league, an event, needs or wants to host their day. So I think it's great showing for Wichita, and I'm glad that we can get the Wichita Open up and running.
We talked about the charitable contributions at the Wichita Open. They provide every single year to local nonprofits. And this year the numbers are down, but I did read that the Wichita Open is able to donate over $100,000 in charitable donations. And it's big, obviously for the economy and for the local nonprofits. And it just, that event is just awesome. We talked about it at length. We don't need to talk about it anymore, but it does kick off on Thursday at Crestview Country Club. So, hoping for a great event there this weekend. That's going to do it for our Wichita Whip Around here on Keeper of the Games. Last but not least on the program is our Finally Funny. We're going back all the way to our top story, talking about the Kansas City Chiefs and their victory against the Chargers. Weston, all of these coaches, I don't know if you read about it, they're getting fined for not wearing masks properly on the sidelines. I know that on the Monday night game, Sean Payton and John Gruden both were fined $100,000, and their team was fined $250,000 each of them. And then there were a couple of other coaches. Vic Fangio from the Broncos was fined. I think Kyle Shanahan was fined as well. So all of these issues with wearing masks on the sideline, Andy Reid is not one of them. He's not even wearing a mask. He's wearing that face shield that everybody talked about in week one on the Thursday night opening game and how it was fogging over. But there wasn't as big of a problem against the Chargers because it looked like he was using some defogger. I read about it a little bit. Do you know more about this and what he used to actually keep that mask or that face shield totally clear during the entire game?
No, I can't say that I don't know about what product he was using, but you could also see there were like little holes inserted in and around the top. So we're not talking about not being able to provide adequate protection, but I did notice, I was like, wow, looks like there's some holes so that you can kind of get that air up and through the shield so it doesn't just continuously probably fog up from his breath and mixture of all sorts of air. But Big Red setting an example, I guess, for the league.
So I did find it. So shout out. And this guy might be the actual MVP of the game and maybe not Harrison Butker, but that's Chiefs equipment manager Alan Wright, because he found a defogging product that's commonly used by hockey players to defog their masks.
That's right.
When they're wearing those. And so he was able to use that, put that on Andy Reid's face shield to keep that from fogging up. And I can't imagine, going back to that opening game, how he was able to see anything. It was so fogged up. And of course, there were all of these memes and people talking about it on social media. So hats off to Alan Wright and Andy Reid for finding a way to make that work. And I would imagine we'll keep seeing Andy Reid rocking that face shield on the sideline.
I hope they get that mask in Canton at some point.
I hope they do too. I think that is just the embodiment of football in 2020. That's is right. Andy Reid's face shield for sure. So hats off to him for finding a way to make that work and avoiding a huge fine from the NFL. So that's our Finally Funny here on Keeper of the Games. And that's going to wrap up this episode for sure. We've got another one in the books. We want to thank you so much for listening. And we want to remind you to make sure to hit subscribe. That way, anytime we have a brand new episode of the podcast, you'll get a notification. Again, we're dropping shows on different days of the week now, depending on our schedules and what's going on. And things might change a little bit when, Weston's baby comes. And so the best way to know about when we have new episodes is to hit subscribe anywhere you listen to your favorite podcast. That way you'll get a notification whenever we drop a new episode. Again, you can find us on platforms like iTunes and Google Podcasts and Spotify, all the rest. You can also watch full episodes on YouTube and on Facebook by searching for Keeper of the Games, and on our website, cogpod.weebly.com. And you can follow us anytime on Twitter and Instagram at cogpod. That's at KOG pod. And I think, I know we don't really have a schedule in mind, but you're going to keep doing shows with us until eventually you can't do a show. And then we've got a special guest co-host in line. But obviously we won't know when that's going to be until the time comes.
That's right. That's right. No, I'm glad we've already started putting in the framework for what it's going to look like. So you'll get plenty of me until then. And just know when you stop hearing my voice, it's probably because I'm in full dad mode.
Yeah, we'll of course, keep our listeners updated on that. Although I'm sure that a lot of them who are listening know you or I.
That's right.
So we'll probably know that ahead of time, but that's okay. We'll make sure to update folks on that, and just know that once Weston has his baby, it doesn't mean that the show is going away. We're just going to kind of adjust for a little bit and then get back to normal after that. So we'll have a full schedule and everything ready to go when that time comes. Before we wrap things up and before we get out of here, Weston, what is your Twitter handle?
At WMills94.
You can follow me at Tweets from Tommy. So we'll plan on being back next week for another episode talking about the Chiefs Monday night game against the Ravens. Hopefully we'll be talking about a Chiefs win, and we'll see if KU and K-State actually happen this weekend. If they do, we'll have a recap of those games as well, and looking forward to the next Big 12 matchups for both of those teams. So until next time, for Weston Mills, I'm Tommy Castor. You've been listening to Keeper of the Games.
Take care, guys.
You've been listening to Keeper of the Games with Tommy Castor and Weston Mills. Don't forget to subscribe, download, and listen on all major podcast platforms like iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and more. Find the podcast and videos on Facebook and YouTube at Keeper of the Games, and follow the podcast on Twitter and Instagram at COGPod. That's KOG Pod.